She was called past her prime, in front of everyone. But the Duke, he saw her, truly saw her, and wrote her name into the royal registry that very night. Why? What does he want from the spinster? Hello, lovely. If you're enjoying this historic romantic tale, I'd be so grateful for a like or a subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories of love, longing, and history. And if you're up for it, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every note, and it always brings a smile to my face. Chapter 1. The Shadows of Fairchild Manor. The morning light that crept through the attic window of Fairchild Manor was pale and apologetic, as though it too understood it had no place disturbing the shadows. Vivian Fairchild woke to its timid touch across her face, blinking against the dust motes that danced in the narrow shaft of sun, the only luxury her sparse room afforded. She rose slowly, her body protesting the thin mattress and threadbare blankets that did little against the autumn chill. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet as she crossed to the washstand, where a cracked porcelain basin held water she'd carried up the previous night. It was cold now, biting against her skin as she washed her face. But Vivienne had long since stopped expecting warmth. The mirror above the washstand was small and fractured, a spiderweb crack running through its center that split her reflection into fragments. She studied those fragments now, as she did most mornings, cataloguing what she saw with the detached precision of someone conducting an inventory. 28 years old. The thought arrived without particular emotion, simply a fact to be acknowledged. Her dark hair, once lustrous, now seemed merely brown, practical, unremarkable. The lines at the corners of her eyes that appeared when she smiled, though she smiled rarely these days. The pallor of her skin from too many hours indoors, away from the sun and society that had no use for her, fading beauty, they would call it, past her prime. The words echoed in her mind, spoken so often by Lady Constance and Delphine that they'd worn grooves into her consciousness like water over stone. But as Vivienne met her own gaze in the fractured mirror, she knew the truth they refused to see. She was intelligent, far more educated than Delphine would ever be, thanks to the books her father had left behind. She was capable, managing half the household despite being given no authority. She was kind, or tried to be, even when kindness earned her nothing but more contempt. The world, however, saw only one thing: spinster. She dressed quickly in one of her two serviceable gowns, this one a faded grey that had once belonged to her mother. The fabric was worn soft with age, the hem carefully mended where it had begun to fray. Below her, through the thin floorboards, she could hear the sounds of the household stirring, the clatter of fine china in the breakfast room, Delphine's laugh, bright and careless, Lady Constance's voice, imperious even at this early hour, the sounds of a world that had no place for her except in service to it. Vivienne descended the narrow servants' stairs, emerging into the warmth and golden light of the main house. The contrast was immediate and deliberate. Where her attic room was all shadows and neglect, the rest of Fairchild Manor gleamed with polished wood and fresh flowers, maintained by servants her stepmother could barely afford but refused to dismiss. Appearances, after all, were everything. The breakfast room was bright with morning sun, the table laden with food Vivienne had helped prepare but would not be invited to share. Lady Constance sat at the head in rustling silk, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed despite the early hour. Delphine lounged beside her, still in her dressing gown, pretty and petulant as a spoiled cat. "There you are," Lady Constance said without looking up from her correspondence. "The tea is cold. Fetch a fresh pot." "Of course." Vivienne moved to obey, her movements efficient and quiet. "Honestly, Vivienne, you move like a ghost," Delphine observed, picking at a pastry. "It's terribly unnerving. Though I suppose at your age one becomes rather spectral." "Delphine, please," Lady Constance said, though her tone held amusement rather than censure. "Your stepsister is hardly ancient, merely. Past marriageable age. There's a difference." Vivienne's hands trembled slightly as she poured the fresh tea, but her face remained carefully blank. She'd learned years ago that reactions only encouraged them. "Still," Delphine continued, warming to her subject, "it is fortunate we allow her to stay. Where else would she go? No prospects, no dowry, no connections of her own." She turned to Vivienne with an expression of exaggerated sympathy. "You must be terribly grateful, sister dear." "I am aware of your generosity," Vivienne replied quietly, setting the teapot down with practiced care. Lady Constance finally looked at her, pale blue eyes assessing and cold. "You're too plain to be noticed, Vivienne. It's not cruelty to speak truth, it's kindness. Better you accept your place than harbor foolish hopes. Hope only leads to disappointment, and you've had quite enough of that." The words landed with the weight of long repetition, each one a small stone added to a cairn built over years. Vivienne stood very still, feeling the familiar ache in her chest, not sharp anymore, just a dull, persistent throb, like an old wound that never quite healed. "Yes, Lady Constance," she said, because there was nothing else to say, nothing that would change anything. She was dismissed with a wave, sent to clear the dishes the servants should have managed. As she worked, she listened to them discuss the day's plans, a fitting for Delphine's new gowns, calls to be made, gossip to be exchanged. Their voices washed over her like water, necessary as background but requiring no real attention. It was only when she'd finished and could finally escape that Vivienne felt her shoulders drop, the tension easing from her spine as she slipped into the one room in Fairchild Manor that was truly hers. The library was modest compared to great houses, but to Vivienne it was vast as cathedrals. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined 3 walls, filled with her father's collection philosophy and history, poetry and scientific treatises, novels both scandalous and sublime. The room smelled of old leather and aging paper, of dust and dreams and possibility. She closed the door behind her and breathed. Here, she could be someone else. Here, the voices that told her she was nothing could be drowned out by greater voices, Wollstonecraft arguing for women's rights, Shakespeare spinning tales of love and loss, Newton explaining the fundamental laws of the universe as though they were simple as arithmetic. Vivienne selected a volume of Greek philosophy and settled into the worn chair by the window. The morning light fell across the pages, and she lost herself in arguments about virtue and the good life, about what it meant to live with purpose and dignity. "If I cannot be wanted," she thought, turning a page, "I will at least be useful, and perhaps, in books, I can live 1,000 lives denied to me." It was a compromise she'd made with herself years ago, when it became clear that the life she'd imagined, marriage, children, a home of her own, would never materialize. She'd grieved it quietly, privately, and then she'd set it aside like a dress that no longer fit. What was the point of mourning what could never be? She was so absorbed in her reading that she didn't hear the knock at first. Only when it came again, sharp and impatient, did she look up. "Enter," she called, already knowing who it would be. The butler appeared, looking apologetic. "Begging your pardon, Lady Vivienne, but this just arrived for Lady Constance." He held out a gilded envelope, thick and expensive, sealed with wax. Vivienne took it, recognizing the quality immediately. "Thank you, Morrison. I'll deliver it." She found them in the morning room, where Lady Constance was instructing Delphine on the proper way to decline an invitation without giving offense. They looked up as she entered, and Lady Constance's eyes sharpened at the sight of the envelope. "What is that?" "It just arrived." Vivienne handed it over, then stepped back, knowing better than to linger uninvited. Lady Constance broke the seal and read, her eyebrows rising with each line. "Good heavens, it's an invitation to the grand ball at Alden Estate." Delphine squealed, actually bouncing in her seat. "The Duke's ball? Oh, Mama, this is perfect. Everyone who's anyone will be there. This is my chance." "Indeed." Lady Constance's smile was sharp and calculating. "We must begin preparations immediately. Your blue silk, I think, with the pearls, and we'll need to arrange your hair." Vivienne began to retreat, but Lady Constance's voice stopped her. "Not you, Vivienne. You'll be attending as well." She turned, surprised. "I will?" asked Delphine's companion. "Naturally." Lady Constance's expression made clear this was not generosity. Every diamond needs contrast, after all. You'll make Delphine shine all the brighter by comparison. Understanding crashed over her like cold water. She was to be the foil, the plain setting that made the jewel more brilliant, the spinster aunt beside the debutante beauty. "Don't worry, sister," Delphine added with false sweetness. "Perhaps you can watch the dancing from the gallery. I'm sure they'll allow it." Vivienne felt the familiar burn of humiliation, but she forced herself to nod. "Of course. Thank you for the consideration." She escaped to her attic room as soon as she could, closing the door and leaning against it, breathing hard. The walls felt closer than usual, the ceiling lower, as though the room itself was trying to compress her into something smaller, more manageable. But then her eyes fell on the trunk in the corner, her mother's trunk, filled with things Lady Constance had deemed too old-fashioned to bother with. Vivienne crossed to it and knelt, lifting the lid. Beneath layers of tissue paper, she found what she remembered, a gown of deep burgundy silk, the color of wine held up to candlelight. It was outdated by at least a decade, the waist higher than current fashion, the sleeves a different shape. But it was beautiful, and it had been her mother's, and no one had told Vivienne she couldn't wear it. She lifted it out carefully, holding it up to the fading light. With some alterations, letting out the seams, updating the trim, it could work. It would still be obviously old-fashioned, but it would be hers. Not borrowed, not charity, not another way to diminish herself. A small act of rebellion, a tiny claiming of dignity. I may be invisible, she thought, already planning the alterations in her mind, but I will not be ashamed. She spent the rest of the day working on the gown, her needle flashing in and out of the silk with practiced precision. The work was meditative, each stitch a small assertion of self. She barely noticed the hours passing, barely registered Delphine's demands from below. As evening fell and she put the finishing touches on the hem, Vivienne caught sight of herself in the cracked mirror. She was holding the gown up against her body, and for just a moment, just one flickering, fragile moment, she saw, not a spinster resigned to shadows, but a woman who deserved better, a woman who was worth seeing. The image wavered in the fractured glass, beautiful and heartbreaking in its impossibility. "Vivienne!" Delphine's shrill voice shattered the moment like thrown stone through glass. "I need you. Come help me with my hair." The vision dissolved. The woman in the mirror became ordinary again, plain, past her prime, useful only in service to others. Vivienne carefully hung the gown and went to answer the summons, the old pattern reasserting itself with the inevitability of tide. Tomorrow was the ball. Tomorrow she would be the shadow that made Delphine's light shine brighter. Tomorrow she would be exactly what they expected her to be. But she would wear her mother's dress. And perhaps, just perhaps, that would be enough. Chapter 2. The Duke's Cold Fortress. Dawn had not yet broken when William Alden, 5th Duke of Alden, sat down at his desk with the day's correspondence. The study was dark, save for the lamp at his elbow, its circle of light illuminating neat stacks of papers arranged with mathematical precision. Outside, the grounds of Alden Estate lay invisible beneath the pre-dawn darkness, vast and silent as a held breath. This was William's preferred time, the hours before the world woke and made its demands. Here, in the quiet, he could maintain the illusion of perfect control. He worked methodically through the letters and reports, his pen scratching across paper as he noted resolutions, made decisions, issued instructions. A request from the vicar for roof repairs approved. A proposal for new irrigation in the eastern fields denied, with detailed explanation of why the funds would be better allocated elsewhere. A tenant dispute over boundary lines that had been simmering for months. William read both sides' accounts twice, then wrote his judgment in clear, decisive strokes. The decision was fair, absolutely, mathematically fair, splitting the difference and assigning costs equitably. There was no room for sentiment in such matters, only logic and precedent. His steward, Mr. Pemberton, arrived precisely at 6, as he did every morning. He was a man of late middle years who had served William's father before him, and he read the judgment with the careful attention it deserved. "Very fair, Your Grace," he said, though something in his tone suggested reservation. "But," William looked up, recognizing the note of hesitation. Pemberton shifted his weight. "The Marsh family has been here for 3 generations, Your Grace. They've farmed that land since your grandfather's time," young Tom Marsh was hoping. "Hoping has nothing to do with it. The boundary survey is clear." William's voice was cold, final. "The law does not bend for sentiment, nor should estate management." "No, Your Grace, of course not." Pemberton placed the papers back on the desk. "It's just, forgive me for saying so, but you're more machine than man these days. Your Grace." The words hung in the air between them, too honest to be easily dismissed. William set down his pen with deliberate care. "Machines don't make mistakes, Pemberton. Machines don't let emotion cloud judgment or allow weakness to compromise duty. If that makes me mechanical, then I accept the description as a compliment." Pemberton said nothing more, but his expression spoke volumes as he gathered the correspondence and withdrew. Alone again, William tried to return to his work, but found his concentration fractured. His eyes drifted to the new letter at the top of the stack, the one he'd been avoiding. The handwriting was his uncle's, the content innocuous estate news from the northern properties. But one line snagged his attention like a thorn. "Young Blackwood and his wife were here last week with their children. Caroline asked to be remembered to you. She seems quite content." The name alone was enough. Caroline. William closed his eyes, and against his will, the memory rose like water through cracked stone. 5 years ago. He'd been 27, newly come into the dukedom after his father's sudden illness. The weight of it had been crushing the title, the responsibilities, the expectations of an entire duchy that looked to him for leadership. And there had been Caroline Blackwood. She'd been the daughter of a respectable gentleman, educated and graceful, with warm brown eyes and a laugh that made him forget, for precious moments, that he was a duke at all. They'd met at a house party, talked until dawn about everything and nothing, and he'd felt something crack open in his chest, something he'd thought his father's rigid upbringing had sealed shut forever. He'd courted her properly, if briefly. Walks in gardens, carefully chaperoned visits, letters that grew increasingly intimate. He'd been, for the first time in his life, happy. Then his father's health had deteriorated rapidly. In those final days, the old duke had summoned William to his bedside. The room had reeked of medicine and dying, and his father's grip on his hand had been surprisingly strong. "You'll marry for the duchy," his father had rasped. "Not for love. Love is weakness, William. It makes men foolish. It makes them vulnerable. A duke cannot afford vulnerability." "Father, promise me." The grip had tightened, desperate. "Promise me you'll put duty first. Always. It's the only way to preserve what we've built. The only way to be strong enough for what's required." And William, 27 years old and terrified of failing the legacy placed on his shoulders, had promised. He'd broken things off with Caroline the day after his father's funeral. She'd stood in the garden at Blackwood House, confusion and hurt dawning in her eyes as he delivered his carefully prepared speech about duty and unsuitability and the requirements of his position. "You don't mean this," she'd said. "William, you can't mean this." But he had. He'd forced himself to mean it, to believe it, because the alternative was admitting his father had been wrong, and his father had never been wrong. His father had built an empire of efficiency and duty, had made the Alden name synonymous with strength and reliability. The last time he'd seen Caroline, months later at a county assembly, she'd been on the arm of her new fiancé. Her eyes had met his across the room, and what he'd seen there wasn't anger or longing, it was betrayal. And worse, it was understanding that he'd chosen his gilded cage over her. She'd married within the year. He'd spent the next 5 years building walls. William opened his eyes, forcing the memory back into its carefully constructed box. That was the past. He'd made his choice, and he'd lived with it. Emotion led to pain. Duty was safety. These were facts, proven by experience. He'd been right to let her go. He'd had no choice. The hollow ache in his chest suggested otherwise, but he ignored it. He'd become skilled at ignoring such things. His eyes fell on another letter, this one in his sister Helena's familiar hand. He'd read it yesterday, but the words had lodged themselves in his mind like splinters. "Dearest William, I worry for you. You've become exactly what Father wanted, cold, alone, and miserable. Is this truly living? Or is it merely existing in service to a legacy that will matter to no one if you have no one to share it with? The ball next week is a beginning. But please, I beg you, don't choose a bride the way you'd choose a broodmare. Choose someone who makes you feel something, anything, other than duty. Your loving sister, Helena." He dismissed it at the time as Helena's typical sentimentality. His sister had always been ruled by emotion, much to their father's despair. She'd married for love, a baron with more charm than fortune, and seemed perfectly content despite the old duke's predictions of disaster. But now, in the quiet of his study, with dawn beginning to grey the windows, her words returned. Is this truly living? The ball tonight. Helena had insisted on it, had arranged everything over his objections. You're 32, William. You need an heir. Find a suitable bride, secure the succession, perform your duty. He'd agreed because she was right, it was duty, and duty was what he understood. Tonight he would dance with eligible young women, assess them with the same cold logic he applied to estate management, and choose one based on practical criteria: good breeding, acceptable connections, youth enough to bear children, no complications, no risk, no feeling. The thought should have brought relief. Instead, it sat in his stomach like lead. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, William allowed his valet to prepare him for the evening. Matthews had been with him since childhood, had served as footman to his father before being elevated to personal service. He was one of the few people William could tolerate during the intimate ritual of dressing. They worked in companionable silence as Matthews helped him into his evening clothes, black coat perfectly tailored, white waistcoat and cravat arranged with mathematical precision. Every detail had to be flawless. Dukes did not have the luxury of appearing disheveled. "You're quiet tonight, Your Grace," Matthews observed, adjusting the fall of William's coat across his shoulders. "Am I usually loquacious?" "Fair point." Matthews stepped back, examining his work with a critical eye. "It's just, forgive me for saying so, but you seem more tense than usual. It's only a ball." "It's not only a ball." William checked his cuffs, ensuring they extended precisely half an inch beyond his coat sleeves. "It's a performance, an audition, a transaction disguised as entertainment." Matthews was silent for a moment, then said carefully, "Your father was a great man, Your Grace. He built much, accomplished much. He did. But he was also a hard man, demanding, uncompromising." William met Matthews' eyes in the mirror. "Hard men build strong legacies." "Perhaps." Matthews picked up William's gloves, brushing invisible lint from them. "But what good is a legacy without joy, Your Grace? What's the point of building an empire if you're too cold to feel satisfaction in it?" The question echoed Helena's letter, and William found he had no answer, or rather, he had the answer his father would have given. "Joy is irrelevant. Duty is everything," but the words stuck in his throat. "That will be all, Matthews," he said instead. The valet withdrew with a small bow, and William was alone. He stood before the full-length mirror, examining himself with the same critical eye he brought to everything. He saw a man of 32 who looked older, the lines around his mouth carved by years of holding back words, the set of his shoulders rigid with the weight of expectation. His dark hair was perfectly arranged. His expression was perfectly controlled. He looked like a duke, cold, competent, untouchable. He looked exactly like his father. His gaze drifted to the portrait above his fireplace, the 5th Duke of Alden, painted in his prime. The resemblance was striking. The same dark hair and eyes, the same strong jaw, the same expression of implacable authority. His father stared down at him from the canvas, forever frozen in judgment. William had spent 5 years trying to honor that gaze, to live up to the standard it represented. 5 years of perfect duty, perfect control, perfect isolation. Is this truly living? He pushed the thought away violently. Tonight was not about living. Tonight was about duty, finding a suitable bride, securing the succession, continuing the legacy his father had died to preserve. He would approach it logically, practically, without emotion or risk. Someone suitable, well-connected, young enough for children. Those were the only criteria that mattered. He would choose with his head, not his heart, because hearts could be broken and heads could not. The decision settled over him like armor, cold and heavy and protective. William descended the stairs toward his ballroom, where he could already hear the orchestra tuning their instruments. Guests would be arriving soon. The performance would begin. He caught his own reflection in the gilt-framed mirror at the base of the stairs, stone-faced, rigid, alone. Matthew's words echoed in the silence. "What good is a legacy without joy?" William pushed the thought away and continued down. Tonight was about duty. Tonight was about control. He had no idea that in 3 hours, both would shatter forever. Chapter 3. The Ball and the Breaking Point. The Fairchild carriage rattled up the long drive to Alden Estate as twilight surrendered to full dark. Inside, Vivienne sat pressed against the corner, trying to make herself as small and unobtrusive as possible, while Delphine occupied the opposite seat in a cloud of silk and expensive perfume. Her stepsister looked magnificent, there was no denying it. The pale blue gown was the latest fashion, cut to showcase Delphine's youth and figure, trimmed with seed pearls that caught the lamplight like scattered stars. Her blonde hair was arranged in elaborate curls, threaded with matching pearls, and her face glowed with excitement and certainty. Vivienne's own reflection in the carriage window was a study in contrast. Her mother's burgundy gown, despite her careful alterations, was unmistakably dated. The higher waist, the different sleeve style, anyone with knowledge of fashion would place it a decade out of style at minimum. But it was beautiful in its own way, the silk still rich despite its age, and it fit her well. It was also all she had. "Remember," Lady Constance said as the carriage slowed before the grand entrance, "you're here as Delphine's companion. Stay in the background. Don't embarrass us with any attempts to put yourself forward." The Duke is looking for a bride, and we cannot afford for you to interfere with Delphine's chances." "Yes, Lady Constance." The words came automatically, worn smooth by repetition. "Good." Her stepmother's smile was sharp as cut glass. "Now, Delphine, remember what we discussed about engaging the Duke in conversation. Be charming but not forward, interested but not desperate." Vivienne stopped listening as footmen opened the carriage door and helped them down. The moment her feet touched the gravel drive, she looked up at Alden Estate and felt her breath catch. It was magnificent. The house rose before them like something from a fairy tale, all golden light spilling from countless windows, the classical facade perfectly proportioned and imposing. The sound of music drifted out into the night strings and woodwinds, weaving together in elegant harmony. For just a moment, standing in the amber glow of the entrance, Vivienne let herself imagine she was truly a guest, that she was here not as a foil but as herself, worthy of walking through those doors with her head high. Then Delphine's elbow dug into her ribs. "Take my shawl, and do try not to look so dour. You're spoiling the effect." The fantasy dissolved. Vivienne took the shawl. The ballroom stole what remained of Vivienne's breath. It was a symphony of opulence, crystal chandeliers cascading light like waterfalls, walls hung with gilt-framed mirrors that multiplied the brilliance until the entire space seemed to glow. The floor was polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the swirl of dancers in their jewel-toned gowns and severe black evening coats. The orchestra occupied a raised dais, their music filling the soaring space with Strauss and Mozart, and everywhere, society's elite. Vivienne recognized faces from the illustrated papers titled Families, wealthy merchants elevated to the gentry, ambitious mothers with their carefully prepared daughters. The air hummed with ambition disguised as gaiety, calculation masked by smiles. Lady Constance immediately began working the room, Delphine on her arm like a prize to be displayed. Vivienne trailed behind, keeping to the periphery as instructed, holding Delphine's shawl and maintaining the invisible presence she'd perfected over years. But she couldn't help watching. The dancers moved through their figures with practiced grace, the young women's faces bright with hope and excitement. She saw one girl, perhaps 19, laughing up at her partner with such unguarded joy that Vivienne's chest ached with vicarious happiness. This was what she'd dreamed of once, being chosen, being wanted, being led across a dance floor by someone who looked at her like she mattered. "I will find beauty in witnessing joy," she told herself firmly, "even if it's not mine to have." It was the only way to survive such evenings with her dignity intact. A ripple of energy passed through the room, conversations dropping to whispers, heads turning toward the grand staircase. Vivienne followed their gazes and felt something shift in the very air. The Duke had arrived. William Alden descended the stairs with the inevitability of tide, and the room rearranged itself around him. He was tall, dark-haired, severe in his evening blacks. Everything about him spoke of power, held in rigid check, the precise way he moved, the careful neutrality of his expression, the cold authority in his eyes as they swept across his guests. He looked, Vivienne thought, like a man performing a role he'd rehearsed to perfection, but had long since stopped feeling. The ambitious mothers converged immediately, each presenting their daughters like offerings at an altar. William received them with impeccable courtesy and crushing disinterest, his face a mask of aristocratic politeness that revealed nothing. He danced, first with Lady Sarah Ashford, a brunette beauty who gazed up at him with practiced adoration, then with Miss Eleanor Pemberton, blonde and lovely and clearly intelligent based on the way she tried to engage him in conversation, then Miss Catherine Thornton and Miss Anne Wilmot, and others whose names Vivienne didn't know. He moved through them mechanically, his steps perfect, his posture flawless, his expression never changing. He might have been sorting ledgers rather than dancing with women who hoped to become his duchess. Vivienne watched from her shadowed corner near the terrace doors, holding Delphine's shawl, and felt an unexpected pang of sympathy for him. He looked profoundly lonely, despite being surrounded by admirers, or perhaps because of it. All those eager faces, all that desperate hope, and none of it touching him at all. Between dances, his eyes swept the ballroom with the same assessing coldness. They passed over Vivienne once, dismissing her as part of the scenery, then returned. She felt the weight of his gaze like a physical thing. He was looking at her, truly looking, with an intensity that made her breath catch. Not the way men usually looked through her, as though she were furniture, but at her, as though trying to solve a puzzle. Then someone claimed his attention, and the moment broke. Vivienne pressed back further into the shadows, heart hammering. She must have imagined it. Dukes didn't look at spinster companions. Dukes didn't see women like her at all. She returned her attention to the dancers, losing herself again in wistful observation. The music was so beautiful, the movement so graceful. If she closed her eyes, she could almost imagine herself out there, spinning through the figures in someone's arms, wanted and chosen. And who is that woman? I don't recognize her. The voice cut through Vivienne's reverie like a knife. She opened her eyes to find Delphine approaching with a knot of young ladies, including the blonde Miss Pemberton and several others whose gowns screamed expensive and fashionable. "Oh, that's my stepsister, Vivienne," Delphine said, her voice pitched deliberately loud. "She's here as my companion." Vivienne's face began to burn. She recognized the tone Delphine was performing, and Vivienne was the unwitting prop. Lady Margaret Pemberton's eyebrows rose. "Stepsister? How old is she? She looks rather mature for a debut." The laughter started before Delphine even answered, cruel and bright as breaking glass. 28, Delphine's voice rang with mock sympathy. "Quite past her prime, I'm afraid. Mama says it's a mercy we keep her on no prospects, you understand. She's a spinster, really." The group's laughter rippled outward, drawing attention, turning heads. Vivienne felt every eye in the vicinity turn to assess her, the outdated gown, the unfashionable hair, the unmarried state that marked her as failed and forgotten. She wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor, to cease existing entirely. But she'd had years of practice in enduring humiliation with dignity. Vivienne curtsied slightly, keeping her face carefully blank. "Excuse me, I'll fetch your refreshment, Miss Delphine." She walked away with her spine straight and her head high, even as her hands began to shake. The whispers followed her past her prime, spinster, mercy to keep her on each word, a needle sliding between her ribs. She found a shadowed alcove near the library entrance and pressed herself into it, one hand against her chest as though she could physically hold her heart together. Her breath came short and fast, tears burning behind her eyes that she absolutely refused to let fall. Not here, not in front of these people. She would maintain her dignity even if it killed her. "Your Grace, forgive me, I didn't mean to." The words tumbled out before she'd fully registered the presence. She'd thought herself alone, but when she looked up, the Duke stood at the alcove entrance, watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher. Her humiliation doubled. Of all people to witness her disgrace, it had to be the host himself. "You have nothing to apologize for, lady." His voice was surprisingly gentle, lacking the cold formality he'd used with everyone else. "Fairchild," the name came out barely above a whisper. "Lady Vivienne Fairchild." William looked at the woman before him and felt something crack open in his chest. He'd heard everything, every cruel word, every mocking laugh. He'd been standing behind a nearby column, seeking a moment's respite from the endless parade of suitable brides, when Delphine Fairchild's voice had cut through the music. Past her prime, spinster, mercy to keep her on. He'd watched Lady Vivienne's face as the words landed, watched the flinch she almost but not quite suppressed, the way her hands had trembled even as she maintained her composure. He'd watched her walk away with her head high and her spine straight, dignity intact, despite the cruelty designed to strip it from her. And something in him had shattered. All evening he'd been evaluating women like livestock, good breeding, acceptable connections, youth enough for children, cold calculations, safe choices, the kind of decision his father would have approved. But this woman, this overlooked spinster in her outdated gown, had borne cruelty with more grace than every titled beauty in the ballroom had borne their own advantages. She was extraordinary, and she had no idea. "Lady Vivienne," he said, the decision forming even as he spoke, "would you honor me with a dance?" Her eyes widened in shock. "Your Grace, I couldn't possibly. I'm not here as a guest. I'm merely—" "You're here." He kept his voice gentle but firm. "That makes you a guest in my home. Will you dance?" I don't understand why you would." Her confusion was painfully honest, her disbelief that anyone would choose her written clear across her face. In that moment, William understood something fundamental. Words wouldn't convince her. She'd been told too many times that she was nothing, unworthy, invisible. Only action would speak loud enough to break through. "Then allow me to show you," he said, and offered his hand. The ballroom fell silent as William led Lady Vivienne Fairchild onto the dance floor. He was aware of the stairs, the whispers starting like wildfire through tinder. He heard his guests' confusion, their shock, their speculation. The Duke dancing with an unknown woman in an outdated gown, it would be the talk of the season. He found he didn't care at all. The music began a waltz, and he drew her into the dance. She was trembling, her hand light as a bird in his, but she followed his lead perfectly. She'd been taught properly, he realized. She simply hadn't been given the chance to practice. What your stepsister said was unconscionably cruel, he said quietly, for her ears alone. It was only the truth, Your Grace. Her voice was small, resigned. No, the word came out harder than he'd intended. It was cruelty disguised as truth. There's a difference. She looked up at him then, really looked, and he saw the intelligence in her eyes, the sharp, observant mind that had been relegated to shadows. He saw the strength it took to survive years of dismissal with kindness intact. He saw everything the world had refused to see because it was too busy looking at youth and fashion and superficial accomplishments. The dance ended too soon. William bowed. Vivienne curtsied, her face a mask of confusion and something that might have been hope. He wanted to say more, wanted to tell her she was worth 100 Delphines, that her dignity under cruelty revealed character those glittering debutantes couldn't imagine. But the words caught in his throat, too raw and too much for a ballroom floor. Instead, he simply said, "Thank you for the dance, Lady Vivienne." Then he turned and walked directly off the ballroom floor, through the staring crowd, and out the doors. His study was blessedly quiet after the ballroom's chaos. William poured brandy with shaking hands, actually shaking, like a green boy at his first dance, and stared at the amber liquid without drinking it. What had he just done? Publicly singled out a woman of no consequence, ignored every suitable prospect in favor of a spinster companion, made a spectacle of himself at his own ball, designed to find a practical, appropriate bride. His father would have been appalled, and William found he didn't give a damn. He thought of Caroline, the woman he'd let duty destroy. The years he'd spent building walls higher and higher until he'd become exactly what his father wanted. Cold, controlled, untouchable, half alive. But tonight, for the first time in 5 years, he'd felt something. Watching Lady Vivienne bear cruelty with grace, seeing her dignity in the face of deliberate humiliation, it had cracked something open in him that he'd thought sealed forever. This will not stand, he thought, and the conviction was absolute. I will not let injustice stand unanswered. Not again. He yanked the bell pull. His secretary, Thornbury, appeared within minutes, clearly roused from his quarters. Your Grace? It's past midnight. I need the Royal Registry documents, William said. Now, Thornbury blinked. Your Grace, those documents are archaic. They haven't been used in decades. I don't care. Bring them to me immediately. And bring the ducal seal. But Your Grace, what? Now, Thornbury. The secretary fled. Alone, William sank into his chair and pressed his hands against his face. Had he gone mad? Acting on impulse, ignoring every principle he'd lived by for 5 years. But the image of Vivienne's face returned the dignity, the strength, the quiet beauty that had nothing to do with youth or fashion and everything to do with character. I've spent 5 years honoring duty, he thought. Tonight, I honor justice, and perhaps myself. Perhaps he honored the man he might have been if Caroline's loss hadn't taught him to fear feeling anything at all. Thornbury returned with a leather portfolio and the Duke's seal. Your Grace, I must advise against... Explain the registry to me. The secretary sighed, recognizing defeat. It's an archaic law from the time of the third Duke. It allows a Duke to register a marriage intent without the lady's prior consent. Once signed and sealed, it's legally binding. The lady's family is informed, and arrangements proceed from there. It's still valid law? Technically, yes, but that's all I need to know. William pulled out parchment, dipped his pen, and began to write. His hand was steady now, decisive. Prepare the formal notification. It goes to Fairchild Manor at first light. Your Grace, Thornbury's face had gone pale. Which lady has accepted your proposal? William's pen didn't pause. No one has accepted anything. I'm claiming a bride. He wrote her name in bold, decisive strokes that would bind them both. Lady Vivienne Fairchild. He signed with his full title, pressed his signet ring into hot wax, and felt something settle in his chest that might have been certainty or might have been terror. Deliver this at first light, he said, handing the document to his stunned secretary. Not negotiable. Thornbury left, clutching the papers like they might explode. William poured more brandy, drank it in one swallow, and stared at his father's portrait across the room. "I chose duty once," he said to the painted eyes. "It destroyed me. Not again." The portrait offered no response, but for the first time in 5 years, William didn't need its approval. Dawn broke grey and hesitant over Fairchild Manor. In her attic room, Vivienne lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling as she had been for hours. She kept replaying the Duke's words, "You have nothing to apologize for." The dance, his gentle voice, the way he'd looked at her not with pity but with something that looked almost like respect. She didn't understand it. Men like him didn't see women like her. It must have been a moment of kindness, nothing more. Perhaps he felt sorry for her after witnessing her humiliation, but his eyes hadn't looked pitying. They'd looked considering, as though he was seeing something no one else had bothered to look for. Vivienne rolled onto her side, watching the sun creep across her wall. In 12 hours, her life would change forever. She had no idea it was coming. Chapter 4. The Summons and the Storm. Vivienne had not slept. She'd lain in her narrow attic bed watching the sky shift from black to grey to the pale gold of dawn, the Duke's words circling endlessly through her mind. "You have nothing to apologize for." She didn't understand them. Didn't understand why he'd danced with her, why he'd spoken with such gentleness, why he'd looked at her as though she was someone worth seeing. Men like him didn't see women like her. It must have been a moment's kindness, nothing more. She rose as the first birds began to sing and made her way down to the kitchen, seeking the comfort of routine. The cook wouldn't arrive for another hour, but Vivienne could start the fire, set the kettles to boil, prepare the breakfast trays that would carry luxury upstairs while she remained below. The knock, when it came, was authoritative enough to echo through the quiet house. Vivienne opened the servants' entrance to find a man in ducal livery, deep blue coat with silver buttons, the Alden crest embroidered on his chest. He held a letter sealed with red wax, and his expression was carefully neutral. "Delivery for Lady Constance Fairchild," he said. "Regarding Lady Vivienne Fairchild." Her stomach dropped. I'll take it to her. My instructions are to deliver it to the lady herself, but I'm told to wait for a response." He handed her the letter. "I'll be with the horses." Vivienne stood in the doorway holding the heavy parchment, feeling its weight like a stone. The wax seal bore a crest she didn't recognize, but the quality of the paper alone spoke of power and consequence. She should take it to Lady Constance. That was proper. That was her place. But her name was on it. Regarding Lady Vivienne Fairchild, Morrison, the butler, appeared from the servants' hall, took one look at the livery on the departing courier, and went pale. "Lady Vivienne, perhaps you should. That is, Lady Constance should be informed immediately." "Yes." Vivienne clutched the letter. "Yes, of course." Lady Constance's morning room was cold despite the fire, or perhaps it only felt that way. Her stepmother sat rigid in her chair, the letter opened on her lap, her face a mask of fury and confusion. "This must be an error," she said for the 3rd time. "Some sort of joke, or a test. Yes, perhaps the Duke is testing our family's discretion. Let me see it." Delphine snatched the letter, her eyes scanning the formal script. Her face transformed as she read, beauty curdling into something ugly. No, this isn't possible. It says, give it to me." Vivienne's voice came out steadier than she felt. Delphine thrust the letter at her with enough force that Vivienne had to catch it. The words swam before her eyes, formal and final. "By authority vested in the Duke of Alden through the Royal Registry Act of 1764, notice is hereby given that Lady Vivienne Fairchild of Fairchild Manor has been entered into the registry as the intended bride of His Grace, William Alden, 5th Duke of Alden. Lady Vivienne is summoned to Alden Estate this afternoon at 2 o'clock to formalize arrangements. A carriage will be provided." The signature was a bold slash across the bottom. William Alden. The paper slipped from Vivienne's fingers. The room tilted. "What did you do?" Lady Constance's voice cut through the ringing in Vivienne's ears. "What scheme is this? What did you say to him? What did you do?" "I did nothing," the words burst out of her. "I don't understand this any more than you do. I danced with him once, and he was kind, and I can't. The Duke was supposed to notice me." Delphine's shriek was pure fury. "You drab, pathetic nothing. How did you must have thrown yourself at him. You must have—" "I did nothing," Vivienne repeated, but her voice was shaking now. I didn't ask for this. I don't want this. That, at least, made Lady Constance pause, her eyes narrowed, calculating. Don't you? A duke's proposal, even one delivered this, irregularly. You'd be a duchess, Vivienne. I'd be a obligation, a charity case. He pities me. The words came from somewhere deep and poisonous. That's all this is. He felt sorry for the old spinster. He pities you. Delphine seized on it, her voice dripping venom. Yes, that's exactly what this is. He felt sorry for you after I spoke the truth last night, and now he's trapped himself with some archaic law. When he realizes what he's done, when he sees you in daylight without the romance of a ballroom, he'll regret it. You'll embarrass him. Embarrass us all. Lady Constance stood, her silk dressing gown rustling. Nevertheless, if this is legitimate, you will marry him. You will secure this family's connection to the olden name. But Vivienne, her voice went cold as winter, if you embarrass us, if you fail to secure this match, you'll have nowhere to return to. Do you understand me? Vivienne understood perfectly. She had no safe haven, no choice, no power. She was trapped between a duke she didn't know and a stepfamily that wanted her only for the status she might bring them. The carriage arrives at 1 o'clock, Lady Constance said. You have 4 hours to make yourself presentable. Don't waste them. The ducal carriage was far finer than anything Vivienne had ever ridden in. Plush velvet seats, windows of real glass, the Alden crest emblazoned on the door. She sat alone in its luxury, watching the countryside roll past, and felt like an imposter. He pities you. Delphine's words circled like carrion birds. Of course he pitied her. What else could explain this? Men like William Alden didn't choose women like her. They chose beautiful, accomplished girls who brought wealth and connections and youth. They didn't choose spinsters in outdated gowns. But she remembered his voice. You have nothing to apologize for. And the way he'd looked at her, not with pity, but with something that looked almost like recognition. I will have answers, she promised herself. I will understand why before I accept anything. The carriage turned through iron gates, and Alden Estate rose before her in afternoon sunlight. It was even more magnificent by day, classical columns, perfectly proportioned windows, grounds that stretched to the horizon. The wealth it represented was staggering, incomprehensible, and she was supposed to belong here. The absurdity of it would have been funny if it weren't so terrifying. A woman in housekeeper's black met her at the entrance, her face kind and weathered. Lady Vivienne, I'm Mrs. Beatrice. Welcome to Alden Estate. Thank you. Vivienne's voice sounded distant to her own ears. His Grace has been quite intense today, my lady. Purposeful, I'd say. Mrs. Beatrice led her through marble halls, hung with portraits of stern-faced ancestors. He's asked that you be shown to the blue drawing room. He'll join you shortly. Vivienne was left alone in a room that probably cost more than Fairchild Manor entire. She stood in its center, hands clasped to stop their trembling, and rehearsed the questions she needed to ask. Why did you do this? What do you want from me? Is this pity? The door opened. William entered, and the air changed. He was just as imposing as she remembered, tall, dark-haired, with that commanding presence that seemed to fill whatever space he occupied. But something was different. He looked uncertain, almost awkward, as he gestured for her to sit. Lady Vivienne, I expect you have questions. Something in his formality, in the assumption that she would simply sit and listen, sparked anger through her fear. Vivienne remained standing. Your Grace, I don't understand any of this. Her voice shook, but she pushed through. You heard my stepsister's cruelty last night. Is this pity? Some charitable gesture to save the poor spinster from her humiliation? His eyebrows rose. He'd expected timidity, she realized, expected her to be grateful and meek. Because, if it is, she continued, forcing herself to meet his eyes, I won't accept it. I'd rather return to my attic room with my dignity than be someone's obligation. William blinked, clearly taken aback. It's not pity. Then what is it? You bound yourself to a stranger using some archaic law. You don't know me, Your Grace. We danced once. We spoke perhaps 10 words to each other. I know what I saw. His voice was sharp now, frustrated. I saw how you bore cruelty with dignity. I saw strength and grace that every titled lady in that ballroom lacked. That's what I know. That doesn't explain why you'd claim me. The words burst out louder than she'd intended. Why you'd use your power to trap me in an arrangement I never asked for, because I've spent 5 years making practical choices. William's control was cracking. 5 years of cold calculation and careful strategy. And where has it gotten me? Alone. Half alive. Last night I made a choice based on conviction instead of calculation, and yes, perhaps it was impulsive, but it felt— He stopped abruptly, as though he'd revealed too much. Impulsive, Vivienne repeated. The word settled like ice in her stomach. So I am an impulse, a momentary feeling that you'll regret when it fades. I don't make impulsive decisions, Lady Vivienne. Despite appearances, this was calculated. The words landed like a slap. Vivienne actually flinched. Calculated. So I am a chess piece in some strategy I don't understand. That's not— William ran a hand through his hair, destroying its perfect arrangement. That came out wrong. I meant— It doesn't matter what you meant, Your Grace. Vivienne's voice had gone flat, the anger draining into resignation. What are the terms of this arrangement? You've made your decision. Now tell me what's expected of me. William was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. You'll have complete autonomy, your own household within the estate, respect from the staff, freedom to pursue your interests. I won't demand— He paused. I won't force intimacy you don't wish. Everything except choice, Vivienne said quietly. The silence that fell between them was heavy with things unsaid. William sank into a chair, and suddenly he looked less like an omnipotent duke and more like a man who'd made a terrible mistake. You're right, he said finally. I've taken your choice. That was arrogant. Vivienne stared at him. She'd expected commands, imperious demands, aristocratic assumptions. Not this. The registry is legally binding, William continued, not meeting her eyes. But I won't force a marriage you cannot abide. Stay for 1 week. Know me. Know this place. If at the end you truly wish to return to Fairchild Manor, I'll find a legal avenue to dissolve it. You'd do that? The question came out barely above a whisper. I would. He looked up then, and his eyes were honest. I've taken enough from you. I won't take your entire future as well. Vivienne's mind raced. Return to Fairchild Manor meant returning to cruelty, to shadows, to being nothing. But staying meant risking what? This man she didn't know? This overwhelming estate? The possibility that Delphine was right, and he'd regret his impulse? But he was offering her a choice. Real choice. For perhaps the first time in her adult life. 1 week, she heard herself say. But I want honesty, Your Grace. Not carefully worded aristocratic platitudes. If I'm to consider this, I need the truth. Something that might have been relief crossed his face. Honesty. I can manage that. Then I'll stay. William stood, and they faced each other across the expensive carpet, two people trapped in a situation neither fully understood. He extended his hand formally. Allow me to show you the estate, Lady Vivienne. When her hand touched his, that shock passed between them again, the same awareness from the ballroom, undeniable and inconvenient. William's eyes darkened. Vivienne's breath caught, neither acknowledged it aloud. But as William led her from the room, his hand still holding hers, Vivienne understood with perfect clarity. This was already far more complicated than a political arrangement, and she had no idea if that was salvation or doom. Chapter 5. Cracks in the armor. The suite they gave Vivienne was 3 times the size of her attic room at Fairchild Manor, with windows that overlooked gardens so vast she couldn't see their end. The bed was canopied in silk, the wardrobe filled with gowns the modiste had delivered that very afternoon, and a writing desk sat positioned to catch the morning light. It was beautiful. It was overwhelming. It felt like a cage made of luxury. She'd spent her first night barely sleeping, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a house too large to know distant footsteps, the settling of ancient timbers, the whisper of wind through corridors that seemed to stretch forever. When dawn came, she was exhausted and more uncertain than ever. But William had invited her to dinner that evening, and Vivienne found herself curious. The private dining room was smaller than she'd expected, intimate despite its elegance. William stood when she entered, and something in his posture suggested he was as nervous as she felt. Lady Vivienne, thank you for joining me. You're quite welcome, Your Grace. The formality felt safer than the alternative. They ate in careful conversation the weather, the estate, neutral topics that revealed nothing. But as the courses progressed and the wine softened the edges of their wariness, the conversation shifted. You mentioned yesterday that you enjoyed reading, William said. What subjects interest you? Philosophy, primarily. History, some political theory. Vivienne watched for his reaction. Most men found such interests unfeminine. His eyebrows rose with what looked like genuine interest. Political theory? Which philosophers? Wollstonecraft, primarily. Though I've read Locke and Rousseau as well. You've read Wollstonecraft? William set down his wineglass. A vindication of the rights of woman. Being relegated to shadows provides ample reading time, Your Grace. She kept her tone light, but the truth beneath it was heavy. Something shifted in William's expression, recognition, perhaps, or respect. What did you think of her arguments regarding women's education? And suddenly they were debating, genuinely debating, about reason and virtue and whether education could truly overcome the limitations society imposed. Vivienne found herself leaning forward, gesturing as she made her points, forgetting to be careful, or quiet, or appropriately deferential. William argued back with equal passion, but he was smiling, actually, smiling in a way that made him look younger and far less intimidating. You disagree with me, he said, sounding delighted rather than offended. I do. Your premise assumes that virtue is inherently tied to reason, but Wollstonecraft argues that women have been denied the education necessary to develop reason fully, which is precisely my point. If we accept that reason can be cultivated, they argued through dessert and into the evening, neither willing to concede, both enjoying the battle too much to want it to end. The library the next morning was everything Vivienne had dreamed libraries could be. 3 stories of books rising to a painted ceiling, spiral staircases connecting the levels, windows flooding the space with light that turned the dust motes to gold. It was 10 times, no, 20 times the size of the collection at Fairchild Manor. She stood in the center and simply stared. Overwhelming? William's voice came from behind her. Extraordinary, she breathed. How many volumes? Approximately 12,000. My grandfather began the collection. I've added to it. He moved past her, scanning the shelves with obvious affection. Feel free to read whatever interests you. Consider it yours. Vivienne moved along the shelves in a daze, trailing her fingers across leather spines. She found a volume on representative government and pulled it down, settling into a chair by the window without thinking. The theories were complex, challenging, but she lost herself in them gladly. When William sat in the chair opposite some time later, she barely noticed until he spoke. Burke or Paine? She looked up. I beg your pardon? On the question of revolution. Burke or Paine? Paine, she said immediately. Burke values tradition over justice. Paine understands that inherited power is not the same as earned authority. William's eyes lit with challenge. But Paine ignores the chaos that follows upheaval. Burke recognizes that stability has value. Stability for whom? For the powerful who benefit from the existing order? And they were off again, debating with increasing animation, their voices rising as they challenged each other's logic. It was exhilarating. It was the most alive Vivienne had felt in years. When William laughed at one of her more pointed arguments, genuine amusement in his voice, she realized something had shifted between them. You don't defer to my title, he observed, still smiling. You registered me without asking. I'll debate philosophy without permission. His smile widened. Fair point. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, and Vivienne felt that awareness again, that pull she didn't understand and wasn't sure she wanted to. The letter arrived on the 3rd morning, delivered with the rest of the post. Vivienne recognized the handwriting immediately. She read it in her room, each line tightening the knot in her stomach. Vivienne, we must discuss this arrangement properly. You are clearly in over your head and require family guidance. Society will question this match, a duke and a spinster companion. Consider carefully whether you're truly suited to such a position or whether you're allowing yourself to be positioned as a curiosity. We expect a response. Your stepmother, Lady Constance Fairchild. The old fears rose like floodwater. You're not suited. You're a curiosity. They'll laugh at you. She was still holding the letter when William found her in the garden, her hands trembling slightly, despite her best efforts at composure. What's wrong? His voice was sharp with concern. Nothing. Just a letter from Lady Constance. She wants to discuss the arrangement. William's expression went cold in a way that made her step back. Let me see it. She handed it over, watching his face darken as he read. When he looked up, his eyes were ice. You don't answer to her anymore. She's my stepmother. She's nothing. William's voice cut like a blade. She has no authority over you. No claim to you. You won't respond to this, and she won't contact you again. He strode toward the house with the letter still in his hand, leaving Vivienne standing alone in the garden. When she followed, she found him in his study, writing furiously. Your Grace, what are you? Ensuring she understands boundaries. He didn't look up. She won't trouble you again. The protectiveness should have been comforting. Instead, Vivienne felt something twist in her chest, the coldness in his voice, the unilateral decision. It reminded her too much of Lady Constance's control, just dressed in finer clothes. I appreciate your concern, but it's handled. Final. Dismissive. Vivienne left the study feeling more uncertain than ever. The crisis arrived the next morning in the form of Lord Ashford's messenger. Vivienne was in the library when she heard raised voices from William's study. She moved closer, not intending to eavesdrop, but unable to help overhearing. Lord Ashford believes the Duke acted improperly. That was Mr. Thornbury, sounding alarmed. He's challenging the registry marriage. William's voice was cold as winter. Claims I've compromised the dignity of the title by choosing unsuitably. He's threatening to spread rumors unless I make concessions on the boundary dispute. Your Grace, this could become a significant scandal, which is why it will be handled immediately and decisively. I want a response drafted within the hour, and Ashford's solicitors contacted. We'll settle this before it spreads. Vivienne backed away, her heart pounding. Unsuitably chosen, scandal. The words echoed everything she'd feared. William became a stranger over the next day. When Vivienne asked what was happening with Lord Ashford, his response was curt. It's duchy business. It doesn't concern you. The warmth of their library debates evaporated. He was cold, distant, making decisions without explanation. She watched him dress down a footman for some minor error, his voice cutting and imperious, and saw the ruthless Duke she'd heard about in society's whispers. This was who he really was. The kindness, the intellectual connection, those had been anomalies. Delphine's words returned with painful clarity. He pities you. At dinner that evening, the silence between them was heavy with everything unsaid. William barely looked at her, his mind clearly elsewhere. Vivienne picked at her food and wondered how she'd been foolish enough to hope. I don't think I can do this. The words tumbled out before Vivienne could stop them. Mrs. Beatrice had found her in the conservatory, trying to lose herself in the exotic plants and failing miserably. The housekeeper sat beside her with the ease of someone who'd comforted many troubled souls. He's so cold, Vivienne continued. For a few days, I thought he might be different, but he's not. He's exactly what everyone said, controlled and controlling and incapable of true warmth. Mrs. Beatrice was quiet for a long moment. His Grace has spent years building walls, my lady. When he's frightened, he hides behind them. Frightened? The Duke? Vivienne couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. Of losing what matters, it's the only thing that's ever scared him. Mrs. Beatrice patted her hand. Give him time, and perhaps give him honesty. He's not accustomed to either. William sat alone in his study well past midnight, staring at the letter he'd drafted to Ashford. It was perfect, cold, legally airtight, designed to destroy any challenge while protecting his position. It was exactly what his father would have written, and it was exactly what was pushing Vivienne away. He'd seen her face at dinner, the withdrawal, the disappointment. He'd been protecting her by handling the crisis alone, but to her, it must look like control, like dismissal, like his father. I've become him, William thought with sudden, horrible clarity. The cold, controlled man who destroys what he loves to preserve it. He thought of Caroline, how he'd pushed her away in the name of duty, how he'd chosen the title over the woman, how he'd spent 5 years regretting it. Was he doing it again? William stood abruptly, abandoning the letter, and went to find Vivienne. She was in the garden at midnight, wrapped in a shawl against the chill, staring at nothing. William approached slowly, suddenly uncertain how to begin. I owe you an apology, he said, and an explanation. Vivienne turned, her expression guarded. You don't owe me anything, Your Grace. This is your home, your duchy. Stop. The word came out harder than intended. Please, I need you to hear this. She waited, silent, and William felt the words catch in his throat. Vulnerability was not something he'd practiced. There was a woman, he said finally, 5 years ago, Caroline Blackwood. I loved her. My father, on his deathbed, made me promise to choose duty over love. I let her go. She married someone else. Vivienne's expression softened slightly. My father taught me that emotion is weakness, William continued, That duty must come first, always. When crisis comes, I revert to those lessons. I shut people out to protect them, but I'm really just afraid. Afraid of what? Of failing, of losing, of caring about something more than I can control. The admission cost him, but it felt necessary. I handled Ashford's challenge alone because that's what I've always done. But to you it must have looked like dismissal, like control. It did, Vivienne said quietly. I've spent years being controlled, Your Grace. I won't trade one cage for another, no matter how gilded. I know. William moved closer. I'm afraid too. I've spent years being told I'm not enough. When you became cold, I thought you'd realize they were right. They were never right. William's voice was fierce. I was a fool today. I tried to protect you by excluding you, and instead, I became exactly what you feared. The silence between them was different, now tentative but honest. I can't promise I won't retreat into old habits, William said, but I promise I'll try, and I promise you'll have the truth, always. Vivienne studied him. Then tell me what's happening with Lord Ashford. William explained the boundary dispute, the challenge to the registry, the threats. Vivienne listened intently, and when he finished, she surprised him. Let me help. I may not have your title, but I have a mind. William felt something shift in his chest. Yes, partners, as I should have treated you from the start. As they walked back toward the manor together, Vivienne asked quietly, What happened to Caroline? William's response was honest and painful. She married someone else, someone who could offer her what I couldn't, a life built on love instead of duty. Vivienne's heart ached for him. He wasn't unfeeling. He'd been wounded, taught to bleed inward where no one could see. For the first time, she wondered, could they heal each other? Chapter 6. The Battlefield of Hearts. Morning light flooded William's study as Vivienne spread the correspondence across his desk. Lord Ashford's letters formed a damning pattern, threats veiled as concern, political pressure disguised as friendly advice. He wants the land, Vivienne said, tracing the timeline with her finger. The boundary dispute is just leverage. If you concede on the marriage, he gains social advantage. If you fight, he creates scandal. Either way, he wins, unless, William leaned forward, watching her mind work with undisguised fascination. Unless you invite him here, address his concerns directly. She looked up, meeting his eyes. He's expecting you to hide me away, to be embarrassed by your choice. Show him the opposite. William stared at her. You want to dine with the man who's threatening to destroy your reputation? I want to disarm him. Her smile was sharp. I may not have been raised for high society, Your Grace, but I understand strategy, and I understand men like him, bullies who retreat when their bluff is called. Pride swelled in William's chest, warm and unexpected. You're certain? Completely. She returned to the letters, and William found his hand settling on her shoulder, a gesture of partnership, of support. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned slightly closer to read a particular passage, and the simple intimacy of the moment made his breath catch. They planned for hours, strategizing like generals before battle. Vivienne's political instincts were extraordinary. She saw angles he'd missed, understood psychological leverage he'd dismissed. She wasn't just intelligent, she was brilliant, and she had no idea. Lord Ashford arrived that evening with the bearing of a man expecting victory. He was tall, silver-haired, with the kind of aristocratic arrogance that came from 3 generations of unchallenged power. His eyes swept the drawing room and landed on Vivienne with barely concealed disdain. Your Grace, he bowed to William with calculated respect. I appreciate the invitation, though I confess I'm surprised by it. I thought it time we spoke plainly. William's voice was controlled but not cold. May I present Lady Vivienne Fairchild, my intended bride? Ashford's bow to Vivienne was perfunctory. Lady Vivienne, Lord Ashford, Vivienne curtsied with perfect grace. I'm pleased to meet you. The Duke speaks highly of your estate management. That caught Ashford off guard. He'd expected timidity, not confidence. Does he indeed? Over dinner, Vivienne was magnificent. She engaged Ashford directly, asking intelligent questions about his lands, his family history, his opinions on agricultural reform. She listened attentively, found common ground, and most cunningly allowed him to feel clever and important. When Ashford inevitably raised the question of propriety, Vivienne met it head-on. I understand there are questions about my suitability, she said calmly. My family is not wealthy, and I'm not a debutante fresh from finishing school. But the Fairchilds are respectable. My grandfather was a baronet, my father a gentleman scholar. I've been educated, perhaps unconventionally, but thoroughly." She paused, letting that sink in. "And I believe the Duke chose me not for what society values, but for what he values. I hope that over time, society will see what he sees, that worth isn't measured solely in titles and dowries." It was perfectly pitched, humble without being servile, honest without being defensive. Ashford had come expecting to find an unsuitable social climber. Instead, he found a dignified, intelligent woman who spoke of family lineage and personal worth with equal conviction. By the end of the evening, Ashford's hostility had thawed to grudging respect. "Your Grace," he said as he prepared to leave, "I may have been hasty in my concerns. Lady Vivienne is clearly a woman of substance. I withdraw my objections, and I apologize for any distress my letters may have caused." After the door closed behind him, William turned to Vivienne with undisguised admiration. "You were remarkable." She flushed with pleasure. "I simply spoke truthfully." "No." William moved closer, his eyes intense. "You saved me from a political disaster. You saw what I couldn't, and you executed it flawlessly. That's more than truth, that's brilliance." For a moment, they stood very close, and the air between them seemed to crackle with something unnamed. Then Vivienne looked away, and the moment passed. But William had seen something in her eyes that made his heart race, something that looked almost like, no, he couldn't let himself hope. Not yet. The letter arrived the next morning with the rest of the post. Vivienne recognized Delphine's handwriting immediately, and her stomach clenched. "Dear sister, I thought you should know what's being said in London. The gossip is quite vicious. They're calling you a social climber who trapped the Duke through manipulation. Some are even suggesting he'll come to his senses and seek an annulment. Lady Pemberton said at Lady Ashworth's tea that the match is peculiar at best, scandalous at worst. I'm sure you're doing your best, but perhaps you should consider whether this arrangement is truly in anyone's interest. Your loving sister, Delphine." Vivienne's hands shook as she read it. Every old insecurity surged back with venomous force. Society thought she was a joke. They were waiting for William to realize his mistake. What if they were right? She was staring at the letter when William found her in the morning room. "Another letter from your family?" "From Delphine." Vivienne's voice was hollow. "Reporting on London gossip. Apparently I'm the scandal of the season, the spinster who trapped a duke." William's expression darkened. "Gossip is meaningless." "Is it?" The words burst out before she could stop them. "Society thinks I'm unsuitable. They're waiting for you to come to your senses. What if they're right? What if I'm being selfish, letting you tie yourself to someone who'll only damage your reputation? Vivienne, perhaps you'd be better off with someone suitable, someone who wouldn't make you the subject of ridicule." William looked like she'd struck him. Before he could respond, Mrs. Beatrice appeared in the doorway. "Your Grace, the modiste has arrived. Should I send her away?" "No." William's voice was firm. "Show her to the blue salon." He turned to Vivienne. "Come with me." The modiste had brought an array of fabrics that made Vivienne's breath catch, silks and velvets in jewel tones, laces so delicate they looked like spun air. She stood overwhelmed as the woman took measurements and made suggestions. "This is too much," Vivienne whispered to William. "You'll be my Duchess." His voice was gentle but absolute. "You deserve beautiful things." He moved closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear. "But more than that, I want you to feel as extraordinary as I see you. Because you are, Vivienne, whether society recognizes it or not." The modiste held up a length of deep sapphire silk. "This would be stunning on you, my lady, with your coloring." "Yes," William said before Vivienne could protest. "That one." Later, William suggested a walk through the grounds. The afternoon was fine, the gardens in full autumn glory, and Vivienne found herself accepting despite her lingering doubts. He offered his arm with old-fashioned courtesy, and she took it. The simple, contact her hand on his sleeve, the warmth of him beside her, felt both natural and electric. William showed her his favorite places, the ancient oak where he'd played as a child, the rose garden his mother had designed, the folly overlooking the lake. As they walked, they talked about everything and nothing, books and ideas, childhood memories and future dreams. At one point, Vivienne said something that made William laugh, genuinely laugh, his head thrown back, the sound unguarded and joyful. She found herself laughing too, and for a moment, everything felt perfectly right. In the rose garden, they paused. The afternoon sun turned everything golden, and William looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Vivienne," he said softly, using her given name for the first time without the formal lady. His hand reached up, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with infinite gentleness. They were inches apart. She could feel his breath, see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, feel the pull between them like gravity. He was going to kiss her. She wanted him to kiss her. But the fear surged. What if Delphine is right? What if this is pity? And Vivienne pulled back. I need time." William's hand dropped. Frustration and understanding warred in his expression. "Of course. Forgive me." "There's nothing to forgive." But her voice shook. They walked back to the house in silence, and Vivienne felt the weight of what she'd refused, pressing on her chest like a stone. That night, alone in her room, Vivienne faced the truth she'd been avoiding. She was falling in love with him, not with the Duke, with all his power and wealth. With William, the man who'd protected her from Ashford, who debated philosophy with genuine interest, who laughed in rose gardens and looked at her like she was worth seeing. But love meant vulnerability. Love meant risking everything on the belief that she was worth choosing. And every letter from Fairchild Manor whispered that she wasn't. William found Mrs. Beatrice in the kitchens late that evening, supervising the next day's menu. "I don't know how to reach her," he admitted without preamble. "Every time we grow closer, she retreats. I'm trying to show her she's valued, but nothing I do seems enough." Mrs. Beatrice studied him with the shrewd eyes of someone who'd watched him grow from boy to man. "Because she's been hurt, Your Grace, told she's worthless for so many years that she can't believe otherwise. You must show her, not tell her that she's valued." "I'm trying, but I'm not skilled at this." "Then perhaps it's time to stop trying to be skilled and simply be honest." Mrs. Beatrice patted his hand. "Tell her the truth, not the pretty version, the raw, terrifying truth." Day 7 dawned grey and tense. The week William had promised was ending, and the question hung between them unspoken. Would Vivienne stay, or would she ask for the annulment? They circled each other all morning, too aware, too anxious, neither willing to force the conversation that would decide everything. The third letter arrived at noon. Vivienne read it in the library, and something inside her crystallized into fury. "Vivienne, I will be plain. If you proceed with this marriage, I will publicly denounce you as a social climber who schemed to entrap the Duke. I will testify to your calculated behavior, your manipulation, your unsuitability. I will destroy whatever reputation you think you've built. Consider carefully whether your selfish ambitions are worth the scandal you'll bring upon yourself and the Duke. This is your final warning, Lady Constance Fairchild." They would never stop. They would always try to drag her down, to make her small, to punish her for daring to want more. But as Vivienne stared at the vicious words, something shifted in her chest. Not fear, not shame, rage, and beneath the rage, something fiercer. Choice. "I am not what they say I am. I am who William sees, and I'm who I choose to be." She stood, the letter crumpling in her fist, and strode toward William's study. William looked up as his study door burst open without preamble. Vivienne stood in the doorway, her face flushed, her eyes blazing, holding a crumpled letter. "What's happened?" He was on his feet immediately. "My stepmother has threatened to publicly destroy my reputation if I marry you." Her voice shook, but not with fear, with fury. "She'll testify that I schemed to trap you. She'll create the scandal she's been threatening." William's own rage rose, but Vivienne held up her hand. "And I've decided I don't care." The words rang with absolute conviction. "Let her try. Let them all try. I'm staying." William stared at her, shocked, speechless. "I'm choosing myself, Your Grace." Vivienne moved closer, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked utterly fearless. "For the first time in my life, I'm choosing what I want. And I want this. I want you." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest and terrifying. "Vivienne." William's control finally shattered. He moved toward her, everything he wanted to say crowding his throat. The door burst open. Lady Constance and Delphine stood in the entrance, uninvited and furious, ready to stop a wedding that hadn't even been discussed. "We need to speak," Lady Constance announced, "about this farce before it goes any further." Chapter 7. The Battle and the Heart. Lady Constance swept into William's study as though she owned it, Delphine trailing behind her like a venomous shadow. Both were dressed for battle in their finest day clothes, faces set with righteous fury barely contained beneath a veneer of aristocratic propriety. "Your Grace," Lady Constance's voice dripped false concern. "I apologize for the intrusion, but this situation has gone far enough. I must speak with you privately about this arrangement." William's expression went arctic. He didn't move from where he stood close to Vivienne, didn't step away or create distance. If anything, he shifted slightly, placing himself more deliberately between her and her stepfamily. "There is nothing private to discuss," he said, his voice cold as winter stone. "And you were not invited." "We're her family," Delphine interjected, her pretty face twisted with spite. "We have every right to be concerned for her welfare. And yours, Your Grace." She moved closer, her tone shifting to poisonous sympathy. "We're concerned for your reputation, Your Grace. Vivienne has, well, she's misrepresented herself. We thought you should know the truth before you make a terrible mistake." "The truth?" William's voice could have cut glass. Lady Constance seized the opening. "She's a social climber, Your Grace, desperate and manipulative. She must have schemed to catch your attention at the ball, thrown herself at you. She's plain," Delphine added with cruel precision. "Past her prime, with no accomplishments to speak of. No connections, no dowry, no skills that would make her suitable for a duchess. Surely you see this match is beneath you." The accusations flew like daggers, each one designed to wound. Vivienne felt them land with the precision of long practice. These were the words that had shaped her self-image for years, the judgments that had hollowed her out from the inside. For a moment, just a moment, she felt herself shrinking. The old patterns reasserted themselves with terrible familiarity. Her voice, when she spoke, wavered with the weight of years. "Perhaps they're right, William. Perhaps I'm not—" "Stop!" The single word cut through everything. William turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his eyes took her breath away. "Don't you dare," he said quietly, fiercely. "Don't you dare let their poison touch you. Not now, not ever again." He turned back to Lady Constance and Delphine, and Vivienne watched his entire bearing transform. This was the Duke of Alden, in full, cold, controlled, and absolutely lethal. "You will address Lady Vivienne with respect," he said, each word precise as a blade, "or you will be forcibly removed from my estate. Those are your only options." Lady Constance sputtered. "Your Grace, we only wish to—" "You wish to continue the systematic destruction you've inflicted for years." William's voice didn't rise, but it filled the room like thunder. "You have spent years tearing down a woman of remarkable intelligence, grace, and strength. You did so to elevate yourselves by diminishing her. That ends now." He advanced on them with the controlled menace of a predator, and both women actually stepped back. "You call her plain?" William's gaze fixed on Lady Constance with surgical precision. "I see a woman whose face reflects her character, kind, honest, resilient. That's a beauty no amount of powder and pretense can create. That's beauty that lasts, that deepens, that matters." He turned to Delphine. "You call her past her prime? She has a mind that would put most of London's suitable debutantes to shame. I prefer intelligence to vapid youth. I prefer substance to superficial accomplishment." His voice dropped to something truly dangerous. "Lady Vivienne possesses more honor in her smallest gesture than your entire family combined. She endured years of your cruelty and remained kind. That is strength beyond anything you could comprehend." "Your Grace," Lady Constance tried again, but William silenced her with a look. "The marriage is legally binding under the royal registry. It will proceed." Each word was final as a judge's gavel, and if either of you attempt to interfere, spread rumors, or contact Lady Vivienne again, I will use every resource at my disposal to destroy your family's reputation." Lady Constance went pale. "You wouldn't—" "I will expose how you treated her," William continued relentlessly. "I will ensure every drawing room in England knows your cruelty. I will make certain that the name Fairchild becomes synonymous with petty tyranny and social climbing through the abuse of a dependent relative. Don't test me on this, Lady Constance. You will lose." The threat hung in the air, all the more terrifying for being delivered in that cold, controlled voice. Lady Constance understood perhaps for the first time that she'd miscalculated catastrophically. William moved to the bell pull. 2 footmen appeared with remarkable speed, as though they'd been waiting just outside. "Escort these women from the estate," William ordered. "They are never to be admitted again. Make certain the staff understands." "Vivienne!" Lady Constance's composure finally cracked. "You ungrateful girl. After everything we've done for you, after we took you in when you had nothing, you've done nothing but harm," William said flatly. "Leave, now." The footman moved forward with apologetic but absolute efficiency. Lady Constance was forced toward the door, still sputtering protests. Delphine shot Vivienne one final look of pure venom, but it was impotent now, a snake with its fangs pulled. The door closed behind them. Silence fell like snow. Vivienne stood frozen, shaking so hard she could barely breathe. Everything that had just happened felt surreal, impossible. She'd spent years bearing their cruelty in silence, and in less than 5 minutes, William had destroyed them utterly. "Are you all right?" William's voice was gentle now, the coldness melting into concern. She tried to answer, but no words came. Too much emotion, relief and grief and gratitude and terror all tangled together until she couldn't separate them. Her legs gave out, and she sank into the nearest chair. Then the tears came, years of held pain breaking through walls she'd built to survive, flooding out in great gasping sobs she couldn't control. She covered her face with her hands, mortified and unable to stop. She felt William move, heard the rustle of fabric, and then he was kneeling before her chair, his hands gently pulling hers away from her face. "Vivienne, look at me." She couldn't bear for him to see her like this, broken, ugly with crying, all the careful composure stripped away. "Please." The word was so gentle that it undid her completely. She looked at him through tears and found his face open in a way she'd never seen, vulnerable, concerned, present. "Why?" The word came out choked. "Why do you defend me? I'm nothing special, I'm just—" "Stop." His hands tightened on hers. "Stop diminishing yourself with their lies." "But they're right." The words burst out in anguish. "I am past my prime. I am plain. I have no accomplishments that matter to anyone." "You're wrong." William's voice was fierce. "And I'm going to tell you why. I need you to hear this, Vivienne. Really hear it." She tried to look away, but he wouldn't let her. He held her gaze with his own, and she saw something in his eyes that looked like— No, she couldn't let herself believe it. "5 years ago," William began, his voice rough with emotion, "I loved a woman named Caroline Blackwood. I let duty destroy that love, and it nearly destroyed me." Vivienne went still, her tears momentarily forgotten. "My father, on his deathbed, made me promise to put duty first, always. He taught me that emotion was weakness, that love made men vulnerable and foolish. So I let Caroline go." His jaw tightened. "She married someone else within the year. I spent the next 5 years building walls, believing that if I could just be cold enough, controlled enough, dutiful enough, I would be safe from ever feeling that kind of pain again." He paused, and when he continued, his voice was raw. "I became exactly what my father wanted. A perfect duke, cold, efficient, alone, William. And then I saw you." His hands framed her face with infinite gentleness. "Standing in my ballroom, watching the dancers with such longing, such open, honest emotion. You weren't performing for anyone. You weren't calculating. You were just feeling. And it was so real, so authentic, that something in me recognized it like a forgotten language." Tears were still streaming down Vivienne's face, but she couldn't look away from him now. "Then I heard your stepsister's cruelty," William continued, "and I saw how you responded with dignity, with grace, with strength I've never possessed. You didn't lash out or crumble or beg. You simply endured, with your head high. And I understood something fundamental." "What?" The word was barely a whisper. "That you had what I'd buried in myself, the capacity to feel deeply despite being taught to hide it, the strength to remain kind despite years of cruelty." His voice dropped to something almost reverent. "I chose you because I saw in you what I'd lost, what I'd convinced myself didn't matter, and I realized it was the only thing that did matter. But I don't." Vivienne struggled for words through the tears. "You're not an obligation," William said firmly. "You're not a charitable gesture. You're not pity, Vivienne. You're the woman who reminded me what it means to be alive, instead of merely existing. I've spent my life performing duty. With you, I finally understand what it means to simply live." Vivienne's breath caught. "You don't mean that." "I've never meant anything more." His thumbs brushed away her tears with exquisite tenderness. "You asked me once why I chose you. The truth? Because you're extraordinary, and the only person who can't see that is you. I'm not extraordinary. Your intelligence challenges me, William interrupted. Your kindness humbles me. Your strength, the strength it took to endure years of cruelty and remain kind, that strength is more valuable than any accomplishment society values. He shifted, still kneeling, bringing their faces level. I don't need a suitable bride, Vivienne. I need you, not despite who you are, but because of who you are. Because you make me want to tear down the walls I've built. Because you make me want to risk feeling again. I'm scared, Vivienne whispered. So am I. William's smile was crooked, vulnerable. I'm not good at this. I've spent years suppressing emotion, and now I barely know how to express it. But I'm asking you not as a duke commanding, but as a man who's falling in love. Vivienne's heart stopped. Marry me, William said, his voice breaking slightly on the words. Not because of the registry, not because of duty or obligation or lack of better options. Marry me because you want to. Choose me the way I've chosen you, as an equal, as a partner, as the person I want beside me for the rest of my life. The silence that followed was full of held breath and hammering hearts. Vivienne looked at him, really looked. She saw past the Duke to the man beneath, the man who'd been wounded by duty and taught that love was weakness. The man who'd risked everything on an impulsive choice because he couldn't bear to see injustice unanswered. The man who was kneeling before her now, offering his heart with shaking hands. He saw her, truly saw her, and he was letting her see him in return. The walls around Vivienne's heart didn't crack. They shattered. I was so afraid to hope, she said, her voice shaking but clear. I've never been chosen before, never been first, never been enough. You're more than enough. But you make me believe I am. Fresh tears spilled over, but these felt different, cleansing. You make me believe I could be. She reached up, touching his face with trembling fingers. Yes, I choose you too. Not because I have no other option, but because I want this. I want you. I'm falling in love with you, William, and it terrifies me. But I'm choosing it anyway. William's control finally broke. He surged up, pulling her to her feet, his hands framing her face with desperate tenderness. Say my name again. William, Vivienne said, and smiled through her tears. He kissed her. It was nothing like the almost kiss in the rose garden. This was passionate, desperate, equal acclaiming for both of them. Vivienne claimed her worth, her right to be loved, her freedom to choose. William claimed his freedom to feel, to love, to be something other than duty incarnate. When they finally broke apart, foreheads touching, both were trembling. I will spend every day proving to you that you were worth choosing, William whispered, and I'll spend every day proving that you were right to choose. They stood holding each other, two wounded people who'd finally found home in the most unlikely of places. A gentle cough from the doorway made them both look up. Mrs. Beatrice stood there, taking in the scene with a knowing smile. Shall I inform the staff to prepare for a wedding, Your Grace? William didn't take his eyes off Vivienne. Yes, as soon as possible. I've waited long enough to make her my Duchess. Vivienne laughed, actually laughed, giddy and free for the first time in her life. Then I suppose we'd better start planning, Your Grace. William grinned, and he looked young and unguarded and happy. William, just William. Very well. Vivienne's smile was radiant. William, Chapter 8, The Spinster's Crown. 2 weeks transformed Alden Estate from a monument to duty into something that felt, impossibly, like home. Vivienne moved through its corridors with quiet confidence now, no longer a guest or an interloper, but someone who belonged. She'd suggested changes to the household management that Mrs. Beatrice had implemented with enthusiasm. She'd befriended the staff, learning their names and their stories. She'd spent hours in the estate office with William, reviewing accounts and discussing improvements to tenant housing. She was no longer hiding in shadows. She was claiming her place in the light. Now, on her wedding morning, she stood in her chambers as Mrs. Beatrice fastened the last button on the most beautiful gown she'd ever seen. The modiste had outdone herself, deep ivory silk that seemed to glow against Vivienne's skin, elegant without being ostentatious, sophisticated without trying too hard. The cut was modern, the details exquisite, and it fit as though it had been made for a duchess, which, Vivienne supposed, it had been. There now, my lady. Mrs. Beatrice stepped back, tears shining in her eyes. You look, oh, you're beautiful. Vivienne turned to the full-length mirror and barely recognized herself, not because she looked so different, but because the woman looking back at her was so clearly undeniably confident. Her shoulders were straight, her chin was high, her eyes held certainty instead of doubt. She thought of the girl in the attic at Fairchild Manor, the one who'd believed she would never be chosen, never be first, never be enough. I'm not that girl anymore, Vivienne thought. I'm the woman I chose to become. I've never seen His Grace so happy, Mrs. Beatrice said, dabbing at her eyes. Not in all the years I've known him. You've given him something I didn't think he could have, joy. He gave me the same, Vivienne said softly. He saw me when I was invisible, and he taught me to see myself. Mrs. Beatrice smiled. Then, you'll make each other very happy indeed. The chapel at Alden Estate was ancient and beautiful, its stone walls softened by centuries of prayer and celebration. Every pew was filled with society's elite. William had insisted on a proper wedding, a public declaration that this was no shame or secret, but a marriage he was proud to claim. Vivienne could feel their eyes on her as she walked down the aisle on the arm of Mr. Pemberton, who'd agreed to give her away in the absence of any family she wished to claim. She heard the whispers, the spinster duchess, quite the unusual match, one wonders, but they rolled off her like water. Let them wonder, let them whisper. She knew her worth now, and that was armor enough. Then she saw William waiting at the altar, and everything else faded. He looked at her with such open emotion that her breath caught. Awe, love, absolute certainty. His eyes never left her face as she approached, and in his gaze she saw everything he'd promised reflected back. She was seen, she was valued, she was chosen. When she reached him and took his hands, William whispered so only she could hear, "You're breathtaking." "So are you," she whispered back, and watched his smile break like sunrise. The ceremony was traditional, the words familiar and sacred, but when the vicar asked if they wished to add personal vows, they both said yes. Vivienne went first, her voice clear and strong. "I vow to never hide in shadows again, to claim my place beside you, not behind you, to be your equal and your partner in all things, to see you as you truly are, and love you for it." William's voice was rough with emotion. "I vow to never let duty silence my heart again, to choose love over obligation, always, to see you, always, as you truly are extraordinary, and to spend every day proving that you were worth choosing." Several guests shifted uncomfortably. The intimacy of it, the raw honesty, was unseemly by society's standards. It was too real, too vulnerable, too honest. Vivienne couldn't have cared less. When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, William kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache and soar simultaneously. The congregation applauded, but she barely heard it. She was too busy being happy. The wedding breakfast was held in Alden Estate's grand ballroom, the same room where, weeks ago, Vivienne had stood invisible on the periphery while her stepsister mocked her. Now she stood at its center as the Duchess of Alden, William's hand warm on her back, society pressing forward to offer congratulations. At the edge of the crowd, nearly hidden by a column, Vivienne caught sight of two familiar figures. Lady Constance and Delphine stood watching, uninvited to the reception but unable to resist attending the church ceremony. They looked diminished, somehow bitter and small, their finest gowns unable to disguise the defeat written across their faces. Vivienne looked at them and felt pity, not anger, not triumph, just a sad understanding that they would never know what she'd found, the freedom that came from being truly seen and truly loved. Her eyes met Delphine's across the room. Her stepsister's gaze was venomous, but Vivienne held it calmly until Delphine looked away first. That small victory felt like closing a chapter. William led her onto the dance floor for their first dance as husband and wife. The orchestra played something soft and romantic, and they moved together with an ease that felt like they'd been dancing together for years. "Are you happy?" William asked quietly, his hand warm at her waist. "I didn't know I could be this happy." Vivienne looked up at him, seeing the man beneath the title her William, who debated philosophy and smiled in rose gardens and looked at her like she was his whole world. "Is it always like this?" "I don't know." His smile was tender. "But I intend to find out. With you." They were lost in each other when an imperious voice cut through the music. "Your Grace." Vivienne turned to find an elderly woman approaching Lady Pemberton, the matriarch of one of England's oldest families. She'd been at the ball, Vivienne remembered. She'd heard everything Delphine had said. "Lady Pemberton." Vivienne kept her voice steady, though she felt William's hand tighten protectively on her waist. "I must say, this match is unexpected," Lady Pemberton's voice carried, and the surrounding conversations quieted. Guests turned to listen, scenting potential scandal. Vivienne felt the old instinct to shrink, to apologize, to make herself smaller. But William's presence beside her was solid and certain, and she'd made a vow not to hide anymore. She met Lady Pemberton's eyes calmly. "Indeed, Lady Pemberton, I expect many find it so. But then, the best things in life are rarely what we expect, are they?" Lady Pemberton's eyebrows rose. "And are you prepared for the responsibilities of being a duchess?" It was a challenge, delivered publicly, designed to expose inadequacy. Vivienne smiled. "I've spent 28 years being invisible, my lady. I've learned to observe, to think, to adapt. I may not have been raised for this role, but I intend to excel at it nonetheless. After all, being overlooked teaches one to see what others miss." The silence that followed was absolute. Then Lady Pemberton's stern expression cracked into something that might have been approval. "Well said, Your Grace." She inclined her head. "I believe you'll do quite well indeed." As the elderly Duchess moved away, William leaned close to whisper, "You were magnificent." Vivienne felt surprise bloom into pride. "I was, wasn't I?" "You are," William corrected, and the look in his eyes made her feel invincible. Evening came soft and golden. William and Vivienne slipped away from the reception as the sun painted the sky in shades of amber, and rose, walking hand in hand toward a small cottage at the edge of the estate grounds. It was beautiful in its simplicity, stone walls softened by climbing roses, windows glowing with candlelight, a place meant for intimacy rather than grandeur. Finally, alone, the formality that had carried them through the day dropped away. Vivienne looked at William, her husband, and felt nerves flutter alongside desire. "We don't have to rush anything," William said gently, reading her expression with the understanding that had drawn her to him from the start. "Tonight, tomorrow, we have time." "I want this." Vivienne moved closer, touching his face with tentative fingers. "I want you. I'm just nervous." William caught her hand, pressed a kiss to her palm. "So am I." "You? The Duke of Alden? Nervous?" The Duke of Alden had a reputation to maintain. His smile was crooked, vulnerable. But William is terrified of disappointing the woman he loves. They sat together on the edge of the bed, still in their wedding finery, and talked about fears and hopes, about expectations and dreams, about the thousand small uncertainties that came with binding two lives together. "I've imagined this moment," William admitted. "But now that it's here, all I can think is that I want to be worthy of the trust you're giving me." "You've already given me more than I dreamed possible." Vivienne leaned her head against his shoulder. "You gave me myself back. That's worth everything." The intimacy that followed was tender and equal, born of genuine emotion rather than mere duty or obligation. Afterwards, lying tangled together in candlelight, Vivienne felt something settle in her chest that might have been peace. "I never thought I'd have this," she whispered. "Any of this." "Neither did I." William's arm tightened around her. "I thought duty was all I'd ever have, cold obligation and an empty house. And now? Now I have everything." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Now I have you." Dawn came gentle through the cottage windows. Vivienne woke to William's heartbeat beneath her ear, his arm solid around her waist, and felt contentment so profound it was almost painful. "Good morning, wife," William murmured, still half asleep. "Good morning, husband." The words felt strange and wonderful on her tongue. They talked as morning light strengthened about plans and possibilities. Vivienne wanted to start a charitable program for women without prospects, wanted to be involved in estate management, wanted to use her position to create change. William not only agreed but actively encouraged it, offering resources and connections. They were true partners, equals planning a life together rather than a duke directing his duchess. When they finally returned to the manor hand in hand, the staff greeted them with genuine warmth. Mrs. Beatrice's smile was knowing, and even the footmen looked pleased. A letter waited on the hall table, an invitation to a grand ball in London. Vivienne picked it up, remembering the last ball, the humiliation, the fear, the moment everything had changed. "Shall we attend?" William asked. Vivienne looked at the invitation, then at her husband, then at herself in the hall mirror. She saw a duchess, a partner, a woman who knew her worth. "Yes," she said confidently, "I'm ready." 4 weeks later, the Duke and Duchess of Alden were announced at Lady Ashworth's ball in London. Every head turned, not in mockery, but in curiosity and respect. Vivienne wore sapphire silk that made her look regal, but more importantly, she wore confidence like a crown. William's pride in her was obvious in every glance, every touch, every public display of affection that made society's matrons tut and secretly envy. They moved onto the dance floor, and the crowd parted for them. Vivienne caught several young women watching, not with pity or contempt, but with something that looked like admiration. She was proof that the world's judgments weren't final, that being overlooked didn't mean being worthless. As they danced, Vivienne's attention snagged on a young woman standing alone at the room's edge. She was perhaps 20, dressed in an outdated gown, watching the dancers with the same wistful longing Vivienne remembered feeling. Invisible, overlooked, uncertain of her worth. No one should ever feel invisible, Vivienne thought fiercely. Later, I'll speak to her. I'll make sure she's seen. What are you thinking? William asked, following her gaze. That I want to change the world. Vivienne looked up at him, seeing her partner, her equal, her love, starting with one girl at a time. William's smile was radiant. Then we'll change it together. They danced, equal partners in every way. Two people who'd found each other in the shadows and brought each other into the light. Two people who'd been called unworthy by a world that didn't know how to see past its own narrow definitions. I spent 28 years being told I was nothing, Vivienne thought as William spun her through the figures. That I was invisible, unworthy, past my prime. I believed them. I thought the shadows were where I belonged. But William saw me, truly saw me, and in seeing me, he taught me to see myself. I'm not invisible. I never was. The world was simply looking in the wrong places. And now I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. She had been called past her prime, unworthy, invisible. He had been called cold, heartless, untouchable. Together, they rewrote the endings society had written for them both. And in doing so, they discovered that being seen, truly seen, was worth every risk. And so, dear friends, Lady Vivienne Fairchild, once dismissed as a spinster past her prime, became the Duchess of Alden. Not through schemes or manipulation, but through the simple, radical act of being seen for who she truly was. She had spent 28 years invisible, but the Duke saw her, and in seeing her, he taught her to see herself. Sometimes, the world tells us we're too old, too plain, too late. But Vivienne and William proved that being overlooked doesn't mean being worthless. That dignity in the face of cruelty is its own kind of strength, and that love, real love, sees past society's shallow judgments to the extraordinary person beneath. If this story touched your heart, I'd be so grateful if you'd give it a like and let me know in the comments what was your favorite moment. Was it when the Duke overheard the cruel words at the ball? When he wrote Vivienne's name into the royal registry that very night? Or perhaps when she finally claimed her worth and chose him back? And if you're new to Lyra's romance stories, welcome. This channel is dedicated to historical romance that celebrates strength, dignity, and love that sees us truly. I have so many more stories waiting for you, dukes and earls, wallflowers and blue stockings, second chances and unlikely matches. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story. Because every week, I bring you tales of women who refuse to accept the world's limitations and the men who were brave enough to see them. Remember, dear listeners, you are never too old, never too late, never past your prime to be chosen, to be loved, to be seen. The right person will see your worth when the world looks away, and that is worth waiting for. Thank you for spending this time with Vivienne and William. Until our next story, may you always know your worth, may you always be seen, and may you always choose love. This is Lyra, reminding you that the best love stories are the ones where both people find themselves by finding each other. Like if you loved this story, comment your favorite moment, subscribe for more historical romance.